Thank you for staying with us. The Conservatives have suffered significant losses in the UK election, leading to questions about the future of the party. Many international commentators are now debating whether the new Labour leader, Keir Starmer, can address the challenges facing the UK. The rise of Reform UK, led by prominent Brexiteer Nigel Farage, has also drawn attention, particularly in Europe, where Farage has become a member of Parliament for the first time. Joining us via Zoom from Brussels, Belgium, is a global affairs analyst, Collins Nweke. Collins, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be with you, Veronica. Thank you for having me.
Now, after this election, a lot of persons began to speak. There are those who said it is unfair. The result was unfair to the UK, as in people from the UK, and there are those who said that it was a major statement being made by UK citizens, and being the fact that this is the worst the Conservatives have witnessed in their over 200-year history. But for you, what were your major takeaways with regards to this election?
My major takeaway is actually the historical significance of the Labour victory. Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, is actually the second in 50 years of British history for a Labour Party to become, elected in a general election to be Prime Minister. So what that essentially means is that the Conservative Party has very, very much dominated the British politics. Now, if you also consider that Keir Starmer is only the 7th Labour leader to be elected Prime Minister in the entire British history, that also adds to the significance of the victory. Now, take aside the British side of it, and also consider what appears to be a consistent trend in the Western countries towards the right of the political spectrum. And here we are with Labour Party, progressive, on the left, even though Keir Starmer could, be considered as a centrist. So, winning the election, where in France, for instance, we saw the performance of, the far-right national rally. In Holland and the Netherlands, we saw how they performed. Here in Belgium, the far right also did very well. So you see, the British politics actually broke away from that, global trend of extremism. And so these are, for me, the most important, elements of the victories of Keir Starmer.
What do you consider the key issues for British, as they went to the poll? What were the key issues? Because although he talked about health, talked about building homes, talked about, not even going ahead with the Rishi Sunak's plan to deport some people back to Rwanda, etc. So what do you think were the issues for for Britain as they went to the polls?
In the scale of importance, I believe that the most significant issue for the British people was the cost of, living, the high cost of living that continued to bite. So they faced the economic realities. But on the second scale, I think the trust deficit that Boris Johnson actually introduced into the lack of trust. So that is the trust deficit that Boris Johnson actually introduced into British politics. They started to see the repercussions. For instance, it has become clear to many British people that they were sold a lie that actually led them to leave the EU, the Brexit. And all of those was masterminded by, Boris Johnson. And then you also consider the COVID-19 menace, where these British citizens were asked to make sacrifices, don't, come out, isolate yourself in your houses and all sorts of rules, whereas the Prime Minister and his cohorts were actually partying in number 10, paid from the people's, purse. So all of those introduced a kind of a trust deficit that people now more and more started asking the question, can we trust, this conservative government? And so when they went to the poll, they indeed had to take all of those into consideration. Of course, immigration was an issue. Rishi Sunak actually hoped that, selling the Rwanda deportation, program to the British people will help to reinvent, their fortunes. But unfortunately, it didn't resonate. As a matter of fact, the Labour Party took the opposite position, which is that they are going to rescind that Rwanda agreement. So there are a number of other issues, but these are the top priorities from my perspective that actually, led to the Labour victory.
And if you look at the papers this morning, at the downstream of the Nation newspaper, you find that it has been reported that the new UK Prime Minister has terminated deportation of migrants to Rwanda. He has obviously overturned that policy. And speaking about Rishi Sunak, we see that he took responsibility of the loss they witnessed, and he has left 10 Downing Street as it is. But quickly talk to us from your perception or perspective of what you saw, his position and posture towards the Labour's, the win for the new Prime Minister. Now, talk to us from your perspective, what you saw him do.
Yeah, well, it was very, very obvious in the run-up to the election that Sunak saw this coming. He saw this coming because every poll, left, right, and center, was actually predicting that Labour was going to win a landslide. Now, the extent of their loss was something that he couldn't, of course, imagine. One thing remains ingrained in the British, history, which is the fact that he was the first, Asian prime minister. He inherited a very, very tumultuous country with the politics actually, disgusting quite a lot of people in terms of, governance and how much government could be trusted. Now, he's had little controversies or scandals to his name. He was fingered in the partying, and don't forget, he wasn't elected. He had to take over when the short-lived Prime Minister Truss actually gave up office. So this was actually the first election as Prime Minister that he partook in, and he failed. So he did his best. He saw this coming, and to some extent, I think there is that feeling that he didn't have to call the snap election, but he did it perhaps as a way of ending the prolonged, suffering. Don't forget that the Conservatives are seen to be people who do not quite serve the people, but more the interest of the elite. And so when Keir Starmer has made it also a point of his premiership that they are going to serve the people, and they're going to make sure that, policies that they push forward are those that actually affect the common man. And it's also not surprising that he already terminated the Rwanda, agreement, because it was a key point of his campaign as well.
Interesting stuff. But then, based on his activities and its, his disposition to the UK leaving the EU and the relationship, one would wonder what the relationship would be, with, the other European countries, especially after the Brexit. Scotland is now pushing for independence, which is really gaining momentum. What impact do you think this would definitely have, the election outcome will have on the future of the UK's unity, and how do you think the government this new government will address this issue?
Well, for a start, I do believe that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party enjoy huge goodwill amongst their European partners. Now, that goodwill appears set to be translated to favorable relations or relationship between the UK and the EU, out of which they had left. Now, talks of, reapplying to be part of the EU, I mean, it's not in the immediate future, but at least they can try to make the best out of what they have. And considering the goodwill that he enjoys and his disposition, to negotiate with them and form closer ties than the Conservatives were willing to do, and the fact that the campaign leading to Brexit was, very, very damaging. Damaging in the sense that the Conservatives took positions that, actually offended quite a lot of nerves within the EU. I'm not sure they forgave them, but, on the other hand, Labour took a fair, respectful position, and that is what has created, the goodwill. Now, the other part of your question, I think I've just lost it.
Talking about Scotland, gaining
Scotland, indeed. Yeah. Scotland, indeed. And independence. Well, no. Independence of Scotland is actually not, on the table now. It is no longer as popular as it used to be because, the Scottish National Party, SNP, is actually struggling. They barely returned just a handful of MPs, to Parliament. And so, the issue of, Scottish independence is something that is now at the back burner, not on the front burner, because the party that was angling so very much for it, has had its power actually, thinned down to the barest minimum. So they will remain part of the UK. And I think, that perhaps is, better for Scotland, considering also that there had been 2 referenda where, the independence was actually stepped down.
All right, let's quickly talk about the person of Nigel Farage, a prominent Brexiteer, who, after 8 attempts, he's now found his way into being a member of Parliament. And one thing that a lot of persons are speaking about is his statement where he said, quote, "This is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you." That's the end of his statement. And we already see some Conservatives rejecting him because there were calls for acceptance of him. But talk to us from your perspective, what you see his being a member of the Parliament will bring on the table for the people.
The far-right gentleman, Nigel Farage, is actually set to cause quite some embarrassment to the Labour Party led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Now, the extent to which the embarrassments would translate, to more popularity of the person himself, Nigel Farage, remains to be seen. Now, you also have to consider the strength of the majority that, the Labour Party currently wields. We are talking of 412, members of Parliament. So what that essentially means is that any law that they want to see passed, any bill at all, will pass so very smoothly, effortlessly. And so Nigel Farage, quite apart from making noise and causing embarrassment to the Labour Party, is not, is not really going to constitute, that much disruption in British politics. Now, most of his votes came from, the Tories, the Conservatives. And so when those are, if you combine his the seats that his party won and those of the Conservative Party, even if they decide to create an alliance, which, like you mentioned, Veronica, is far from it, they are still not going to make any dent to the plans that the Labour Party had. So I think they remain insignificant, but you never say never. All
right. We'll have to leave the conversation here now. Global Affairs Analyst who joined us from Brussels, Belgium, Collins Nweke, thank you so much for your time on the program.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right. You're welcome. Now,